Hey everyone, I'm Bronwyn Murphy and I'm the Inclusion Coordinator here at University Covenant Church in Davis, California. I'm also working with the Pacific Southwest Conference of the Evangelical Covenant Church, working with pastors and ministry leaders, equipping and supporting them in their parenting of children with disabilities. So that's what I am. And I'm really excited to be speaking at this Community for All conference sponsored by the Faith Inclusion Network of Hampton Roads. I've actually admired them for quite some time and have used a lot of past conference videos in my trainings and such, and so I'm very excited to be here. Now, some of you get to hear me twice during this conference, and I'm sorry for that. You could change your signups now if you want. But this session is called Building the Next Inclusive Generation. So if you're here by mistake, I invite you to stay. If you're here on purpose, great. I'd love to see you. All right, so building the next inclusive generation. So why does this matter and how do we do it? So what is the next inclusive generation? So when we talk about this, we're talking about essentially Generation Z. So this like post-millennial generation that is coming up in our schools, in our elementary schools, our high schools, our junior high schools, and our colleges, and even in our grad schools. So Generation Z. Right? Why focus on this generation? Why focus on youth and young people when we talk about inclusion? Well, there's a few things. Youth now are growing up in what might be the most inclusive culture to date. So the most recent statistics that I found said that about 95% of all kids, students in school on individualized education plans, on IEPs, 95% of them are being served in their general education classrooms. 63% of them are in their general education classes 80% of their day. So we have our youth and our children and our college students that are growing up alongside their peers with disabilities. This is a far cry from the 70s and 80s when many persons with disabilities in our nation were institutionalized, and they were not in our communities. They were not in our schools. They were not playing on our soccer teams. Right? When I was in high school, this is like the late 90s in California, we had a whole separate high school campus across the way from my comprehensive big high school that was serving individuals with disabilities. I was totally unaware that individuals with disabilities existed in my school or in my community. As it turns out, I was unaware of a lot of things in high school, looking back 20 years post-grad. Turns out I was unaware of a lot of things, but I was unaware, right, that individuals with disabilities existed in my context. Right? So our youth today are growing up in the most inclusive education environment that has probably ever occurred in history. Right? And as a result of that, right, it's not only in schools, right? Kids are learning right alongside their peers with autism. They're in the drama club, they're on the baseball team, right? They're doing the school yearbook alongside their peers with ADHD. They're going to Sunday school and learning, right, about faith alongside their peers with Down syndrome and epilepsy and cerebral palsy. It may be the most inclusive educational experience in the most inclusive community that we have ever had. And our youth, Generation Z, is right in the middle of it. All right? Also, Generation Z has access to be influencers like never before. And I know everyone says social media is terrible, and you know what? Sometimes it is. Sometimes social media is terrible, but sometimes it's not, right? All right, our students, our elementary schoolers, our junior hires, our high schoolers, our college students have the ability to connect with people, to reach people, to champion and advocate for people like never before because of things like social media, because of things like TikTok and Snapchat and Instagram. I was told that old people are on Facebook, so not Facebook, right? Right, so this inclusivity in our education and in our community, plus the ability to be influencers, right? This primes Generation Z to be right in the center, right? Right in the center of becoming the next inclusive generation. And now, I think this is a lot like making chocolate chip cookies. And you're like, I don't think this is at all like making chocolate chip cookies, but I'm going to tell you why it is. So over here, you think about when you make chocolate chip cookies, you get your ingredients, right? You're gonna have your sugar, right? You're gonna have some butter. You're gonna have some other stuff, like flour, eggs, vanilla. If you're really fancy, you might have whatever fancy people put in chocolate chip cookies. But it doesn't really become a chocolate chip cookie, right, until you add the bag of chocolate chips. Right? It doesn't become a chocolate chip cookie until you add this bag of chocolate chips. And this is the defining factor of a chocolate chip cookie. This is what makes it a chocolate chip cookie. So if we think of all these chocolate chips as youth and kids, right, that are in this integrated, inclusive environment, right, and we put them right here, right, into the batter of society, right? We put them in their schools, we put them in their soccer teams, in their Boy Scouts, and their Girl Scouts, we put them in their communities, right? They're going to fundamentally change those institutions, those organizations, and those communities, just like adding a chocolate chip cookie, just like adding a chocolate chip to a chocolate chip cookie is going to fundamentally change it, right? And you toss it all in, right? You toss all these things in, you mix it around, right? And here you go. You have the finished product. And there is no way that you can bite into this cookie and not experience some chocolate chip goodness, right? So if we invest in Generation Z, right, they start to become like these chocolate chips, right? And they will touch every part, right, of this community. And chocolate chip cookies are delicious, right? So how do we do this? How do we encourage and support our young people? I say young people like I'm not young. Maybe I'm not anymore. I don't know. How do we encourage them in this journey toward inclusivity? Right? There's a fantastic book called Generation Z Unfiltered by Tim Elmore. Now, I'm not a huge reader, but I did read this book. We read it as part of our children and youth team here at church where I work. And he talks about this idea that I love. It's the idea of prescriptive leadership versus descriptive leadership. Being a prescriptive leader versus being a descriptive leader. Right? And most of us, most of church, right, most of your faith community, you guys might fall, we might fall under what we call prescriptive leadership. Because this is kind of like, I think, the way things are done a lot of times. Prescriptive leadership says, here's the goal. Here's the goal, and here is a piece of paper, or if you're really techie, a Google Doc, a shared Google Doc that you can't edit, you're only going to view it. Here is a Google Doc with the precise steps that you have to take, that you're going to take to reach this goal. Right? So we're saying in prescriptive leadership, we are prescribing you, right, the formula for reaching this goal. And in us prescribe, the thought is, as we prescribe this to you, you're not going to make a mistake. There's no way you could fail if you stick to the plan, right? There's going to be no mistakes, no failure. Everything will turn out just as we hope. Now, if you've ever planned anything in life, you know that that's not necessarily true, right? You could tell someone the best, most detailed plan ever, and it still might not work, right? And what prescriptive leadership does is it strips away, right, any self-advocacy, any self-agency, any creativity, right, any ownership. It strips that away from the person receiving that set of steps that they have to take. So instead, we want to shift towards something in our faith communities that's called descriptive leadership. And descriptive leadership says, this is the goal we are working toward. This is the goal we are working toward, and I want you, oh volunteer, you, oh ministry leader, right? You, oh youth person, I want you to formulate some steps to take to reach that goal. I want you to use your creativity to help reach this goal. And when we do that, we give the gift of shared leadership and shared ownership in reaching that goal, right? And studies show that Generation Z, and honestly, me too, flourish when given this opportunity, right? Be descriptive leaders instead of prescriptive leaders. And now again, maybe there's some risk in descriptive leadership, right? It is maybe scary for us to turn over, right, part of that control, right, or like that notion of maybe we have control, right? But the outcomes are going to be so much better, not just for your ministry or organization, right, but for those that you are investing your time in. I'm back. So this book was written in 2019 about Generation Z. But back in 1957, a Christian theologian by the name of Paul Tillich wrote a book called Dynamics of Faith. Now, I read it a long time ago, and I recently revisited it. So Paul Tillich in Dynamics of Faith talks about this idea of faith within a community, developing faith within a community. And he says the impact of community lends itself to this idea of what he calls creative faith. And creative faith is what withstands adversity. Creative faith is what withstands the adversity, the high winds that come, right? Those difficult times in life and ministry. If you have a creative faith, Tillich argues, you are built to withstand that. And I'm going to say that descriptive leadership lends itself to forming creative faith, particularly creative faith in Generation Z. Now, here at University Covenant, we have the very good blessing and fortune of having so many elementary schoolers, junior hires, high schoolers, college students, post-grad students who are engaged in inclusion, engaged in making our church and our communities more inclusive. And I'm going to tell you a story about Dominic. Now, I first encountered Dominic when he was probably a 5th grader, and my son was in preschool. And my son, at the time, he still does, plays in a baseball league called Challenger Baseball. And Challenger Baseball is run through Little League, and it pairs big buddies with individuals with disabilities or extra support needs who want to play Little League. And they have a team called Challenger. And we play other teams in the region. So this buddy, Dominic, signed up to be a Challenger Baseball buddy. And it might have been one of the single best things that has ever happened in my son's life. So my son, like I said, was a preschooler. And Dominic would come, and he would sit in the dugout with my son. He would remind him to bring his glove out to the field when it was time to go in the outfield. He would help him pick out a bat, put on his batting helmet, and he would cheer for him as he hit the ball and ran the bases, because every hit for that guy was a home run. No matter where it went, no matter how far the ball went, every hit was a home run. So Dominic did this for that preschool season. And my son loved Dominic. And the best part about Dominic, he wasn't there for the baseball. He wasn't there because he needed community service hours. He was there because he wanted to build a relationship with my son and make our community a little more inclusive. And actually, every summer since then, Dominic has served as a big buddy for our camp at church that we call Breakaway. It's a big camp that we put on for kids in our church and our community. COVID has changed that a little bit, but we still do it. And Dominic has served as a big buddy for my son each and every summer. And as the summers have gone on, they've built a very cool, very deep, very authentic relationship. And Dominic started when he was in 5th grade. He's in 10th grade now, and you know what? There's a whole giant herd of 10th grade boys and girls who have come to be part of our inclusion ministry because of people like Dominic. My second example is someone named Sean. Sean is very near and dear to our family. I met Sean, I think he was probably in 6th grade or so when I first met him. And Sean loves to serve. Sean loves kids. Sean came to every breakaway camp as a student, and then he became a volunteer. He's helped in preschool. He's been on the dance team, which is like the most popular volunteer team. Kids love it. And he currently works at our outdoor preschool. We have a fully inclusive outdoor preschool here on campus. And he currently works setting up and taking down all of our equipment each day. But I think he comes for more than just a setup and takedown. He comes to connect with the kids. My kids, other people's kids run up to him, Sean, you're here today, right? and he loves it, and so do they. And again, he began his service when he was probably in 6th or 7th grade. He's 18 now, he's a college freshman and doing awesome, and he's doing awesome things serving our church. Right? And in a minute, you're going to hear from two other folks in college, Melanie and Kayla. They were interns in inclusion here at UCC. And you'll hear their take on what inclusion means for them and why, kind of how they've grown in that. Right. And these are just 4 examples. I could give many in our church, and I'm sure if you think in your church, your organization, right, you can think of many examples as well. And there are many more out there to be had. Right? So why? Why build the next inclusive generation, and why focus on elementary schoolers, junior hires, high schoolers, college students? It's because Generation Z has the potential to live the most inclusive lives ever. Much more than me, right? Much more than those who went to school in the 80s, right? When we were still segregating and excluding folks, right? They have the potential to live the most inclusive lives ever, and that potential is going to spill over in our soccer teams, in our Girl Scouts, our Boy Scouts, our drama clubs, and our faith communities. And again, how do we do this? How do we do this? With shared descriptive leadership that promotes this idea of creative faith. Right? So in a minute, you'll hear from Melanie and Kayla, and I'm going to send some breakout questions. I know some of you have groups that you're going to be working with. If you'd like to reach me, my email is Bronwyn, my first name, BRONWYN, @ucov.com. I'll pop up a slide. I'd love to hear from you anytime. I love to see who's out there listening to these and what kind of questions you guys have. All right, thank you so much.
I love serving in inclusion because it gives me the opportunity to share God's love with His people. I think that inclusion is a special ministry that allows for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they come from, to feel love and supported. For me, especially in this day and age where everything is so fast-paced, people from my generation are often too busy chasing careers or an academic goal, and it's easy to just go on life without noticing people around them. I think that inclusion allows us to kind of take a step back and to notice the people who are around us that are in need. It challenges us to kind of think about what we can do to help others and how we can be a blessing to others. Inclusion ministry has allowed me to use the gifts that God has given me to bless others in many ways.
My experiences as an inclusion intern have helped shape my worldview and define my college experience. I feel like as a college student or young adult, it's really easy to only engage with people who are about my age and who have had similar life experiences to me. But my experiences on this team have allowed me to really connect with people from a lot of different stages in life who are facing difficulties that I have never had to face. Especially recently during the pandemic, that has definitely been true. Through working with these kids and families, I have learned how to see people the way Jesus did, despite their abilities or their challenges. And that's a lesson that I will take with me in any community that I find myself in and throughout the rest of my life.